Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today will be the very first episode in a series that I will be doing called Heinous History, and it's where I talk about lesser known and well-known crimes that happened a very long time ago. And today we're traveling all the way back to the 1800s, and we're going to be discussing one of the universe's most rarest of creatures, the female serial killer. This woman was insane. She is known to have killed at least 14 people, but is thought to have killed up to 40 people, and amongst her victims were her own children. She's also thought to have faked her own death before being brought to justice, so there's still to this day tons of confusion and mystery that surround this case. But before we get too far into this, if you're like me and you're obsessed with all things crime, cults, and heinous history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I upload content just like this every other Saturday, and I'm brand new here on YouTube, and it would really help me out. And now I will stop begging for help and we can just get started. So if you haven't figured it out yet, we are going to be talking about the case of Belle Gunness, or you may know her as Hell's Belle, the true Black Widow, the Lady Bluebeard, Hell's Princess. The media has given this lady a lot of names. And I know that this case has been covered quite a bit, but I've always found it absolutely fascinating, and I knew when I decided to do this history segment on my channel that I wanted to make this my very first case that I talked about. I hope that you find this video interesting even if you've heard this case before. So we're opening up today's case in the small town of Selbu, Norway on November 11th, 1859. A brand new baby girl has just been born to parents Paul Storset and his wife Berit Alsdotter. Her name is Brynhild Paulsdotter Storset. And not too much is known about Brynhild's very early life. It's known that she was the youngest of 8 children and that her parents were extremely poor, and she began working as a milkmaid at a very young age for local farmers. It's said that in 1876, Brynhild fell pregnant at the age of 17, but was badly beaten by the baby's father, causing her to miscarry. A month later, the baby's father mysteriously died after showing symptoms of being poisoned, and it caused her personality to change noticeably. Brynhild ended up leaving Norway in 1881 and setting sail for America, where she was going to live with her sister, Nellie Larson, in Chicago. Her sister had left for America several years earlier. Brynhild knew that this was something that she wanted to do eventually as well. So she took the money that she had earned working as a milkmaid, and she used this to buy a ticket and set sail for America. And when she arrived in America, she had to go through immigration processing, and this is when she ended up officially changing her name to Belle. So from here on out in this video, we will refer to her as Belle. So Belle was living with her sister Nellie Larson and Nellie's husband in Chicago, and she got a job working as a maid for a very wealthy family. And unfortunately, since Belle was an immigrant, she was taken advantage of, and she was forced to work long, hard hours for very little pay. Belle would become obsessed with having a piece of the good life. She saw all the riches that her employers had, and she knew that one day she wanted this for herself. And so what's a young, money-hungry 19th century girl to do when she wants a piece of the good life? She starts searching for a husband. And in 1884, Belle meets and marries a fellow Norwegian immigrant named Mads Sorensen. Mads was a department store detective when the couple met, and later got a job working for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad for $12 to $15 per week. This would be about $360 to $450 per week in today's money. The couple would go on to have 4 children: Lucy, Caroline, Axel, and Myrtle. Now, Belle had married Mads in an attempt to get a piece of the good life, a piece of the easy life, but Mads' income wasn't cutting it for Belle. She needed more if she was going to live the type of lifestyle that she had been dreaming of. So in 1896, Belle and Mads decide to open up a confectionery in downtown Chicago. This business did not do well, however, and within the first year, their shop actually burned down. Belle had insurance on this shop, and she very quickly made an insurance claim once the fire happened. She told the insurance company that the fire was started when a kerosene lamp fell to the ground and shattered. So the insurance company do a very rudimentary investigation. They come out, they go through the ruins. They don't find the lamp amongst the ruins of the fire, but they figure, you know what, they're probably telling the truth, we'll just pay them anyways. And so that's what they do. And the money that the Sorensens got from this insurance claim was used to purchase their first home in Austin, Texas. Around the same time, the couple's baby daughter, Carolyn, fell very, very ill. She started having extreme abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, high fever, and she would sadly go on to die from whatever this illness was. After she passed away, the doctors did examine her body and determined her cause of death to be acute colitis, just mainly based on the symptoms that she'd had right before dying. Belle had placed an insurance policy on her daughter before she died, and she cashed in on this right after Carolyn's death. So once again, without much question at all, Belle comes into a lot of money from an insurance claim. And tragedy would strike again in 1898 when the Sorensens' home burned down. And once again, an insurance policy had been taken out on the home, and again, without question, it was paid. And in the same year that their Austin, Texas home burned down, another of the Sorensen children fell ill with the same exact symptoms that Caroline had had. This time it was baby Axel, and he too passed away. And just like his sister Caroline, Belle had taken out an insurance policy on Axel, and once again, his death was deemed to be from acute colitis, and the insurance policy was paid out without much question. And then just 2 years after Axel's death, Mads Sorensen himself passed away in 1900. Now, people were starting to get a little suspicious here. This is now half of the original Sorensen family that has died in the matter of 4 years. Each time Belle has acquired a large amount of money from these insurance policies. So when Mads died, his family started asking questions. Belle claimed that Mads had come home that day with a headache. So Belle gives him some quinine powder for the pain, and then she goes to start dinner. And she says that she left him healthy, but just with a headache and now medicated so that she could go start dinner. And then she, soon after that, went to go check on him and found him dead. Mads' family found this explanation extremely suspicious. He had all the symptoms of strychnine poisoning, but they really couldn't prove anything, and so they requested a full inquest into the death of Mads Sorensen. But right around this time, Mads' doctor, like his general doctor, came forward and told everyone that he had been treating Mads for a heart condition, and that it was his opinion that Mads had died from this heart condition. So this explanation was accepted by authorities. Once again, Belle gets a big payout from the life insurance policies. But what's even more suspicious here is that Mads died on the one and only day that two separate life insurance policies overlapped each other. This meant a double payout for Belle. If it wasn't already suspicious, now it's like insanely suspicious. Mads' family is definitely side-eyeing Belle at this point. So Belle gets this double insurance payout and ends up making what in today's money would be close to $300,000 from Mads' death. So maybe Belle was starting to worry that people were getting suspicious. She kind of figures that if she wants to keep burning things down and killing people, she's gonna have to move away to a different state. So in 1901, Belle buys a farm in LaPorte, Indiana, and she and her remaining children, Myrtle and Lucy, and an adopted daughter that had been living with the family for quite a while, named Jenny Olson, all move onto this farm in Indiana. This farm has a very rich history of its own, which I will not get into, but if you're interested, you could find out more about it in the LaPorte archives. The property was considered to be very nice, especially for the time, and it even had something called a boat pavilion and a carriage house, but both of these structures burned down right after Belle moved in. Come on, Belle. And after 2 long years of mourning the death of Mads, Belle decides that she really needs a new husband. So in 1902, Belle meets a widowed man named Peter Gunness, who has an infant daughter of his own. Belle and Peter have a very quick courtship and end up getting married on April 1st, 1902, and they join families. But only 1 week after the wedding, Peter's 7-month-old daughter mysteriously passes away while alone in Belle's care. And then later on in that same year, 1902, Peter Gunness also passes away. So within just a year of marrying Belle, both Peter and his daughter have died. And guess what? life insurance policies on both of them. So of course, people are asking questions about why Peter Gunness had passed away. So Belle tells authorities that Peter had died when an auger from a sausage grinder fell from a high shelf and landed on his head. And when Peter Gunness died, Belle was actually pregnant with his child, and she went on to have a son in the spring of 1903 whom she named Philip. Belle did not waste any time mourning the death of her second husband. She very quickly began hunting for a new victim. So Belle starts placing ads in the Norwegian American newspapers, and they were called matrimonial ads, and she would make promises of her being this really attractive widow who was, had all this money and was just in the market to find a wealthy man to come marry her, and they could combine fortunes and live happily ever after on her farm. She would also make promises of home-cooked Norwegian meals, just really trying to play on Norwegian immigrants' love for their old country. One of the ads that Belle placed in one of these newspapers read, quote, "Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." Basically just market herself as this sweet Norwegian woman who would give them that feel of being home in Norway, and she had this money and she was attractive and they could just get together and just live this dream life on her farm. And Belle received a ton of responses to these ads that she would place. It's reported that she was receiving up to 8 responses per day. She would aim for men who had money and who didn't have a very close relationship with their families, so it would make it easier for her to make these men disappear without question. She would start corresponding with these men, and she would soon just profess her undying love for them. She would lure them in with all kind of seductive language. Soon she would convince them to sell off all of their possessions and liquidate all their assets and clear out all of their savings account and take all of this money and come to her farm to marry her. And of course, this was a trap. Soon after the men arrived with this huge lump sum of money, they would walk into the Gunness farm and they would never be seen again. And neighbors started noticing all of these middle-aged men entering the Gunness farm and never coming out. And Belle would explain away these disappearances by saying that these men would have emergencies come up and would have to leave in the middle of the night. And that's why the neighbors never saw them leave. And the men in Belle's life were not the only ones disappearing around her. In 1906, her adopted daughter, Jenny Olsen, also disappeared. When Jenny's friends started questioning Belle about Jenny's whereabouts, Belle would just tell them that she had left and went to college in California. And also in 1906, Belle hires a man named Ray Lamphere to come live on her farm and work as a farmhand. Ray was responsible for basically the general upkeep of the farm, and it's said that he and Belle became on and off lovers. But of course, Ray was but a lowly farmhand and not good enough for Belle, so he was never truly considered an actual boyfriend. This was all just fun for Belle. And so she continued putting these personal ads in the paper and luring these men to her farm. Now, it's unknown how many men actually showed up on Belle's farm, but we do know that amongst those men, there was only one man that managed to escape Belle's clutches. His name was George Anderson, and he was a wealthy man from Missouri. He had answered Belle's ad, and the two began corresponding, and so he shows up on Belle's farm one day with all of his money. The two go to dinner, and over dinner, they're discussing life and just kind of getting to know each other, and the dinner ended well, and afterwards, George goes back to Belle's house where he was going to be staying for the night, and he's in a separate room. Belle's in her room, George is in a guest room, and then something super creepy happens. George suddenly wakes up out of a dead sleep and finds Belle Gunness standing over him, just staring at him, watching him sleep. And he can see her face by candlelight because she's holding a candle. And that's got to be like the creepiest image ever. George says that as soon as Belle looked at him and noticed that he was awake, she freaked out and ran out of the room. George would say that when he saw Belle's face that night, when he opened his eyes, she looked like a different person. She no longer looked like a warm, welcoming person. She looked twisted, and she just had this dead look on her face. And this was enough to completely freak this man out, and all kind of alarm bells are going off. So he grabs his stuff and he gets out of there like immediately. He's the only known survivor of this whole ordeal with Belle Gunness. And after Belle's crimes become known later on in the story, it had to have been really weird for George to know that he could have been one of those men. He could have been one of the victims, and that if he wouldn't have woken up out of his dead sleep that night, he likely would have been killed by Belle as well. The last victim of Belle's little matrimonial ad scheme was a man named Andrew Helgelien, and I'm probably butchering that name because it is Norwegian, so I'm really sorry. I'm doing the best I can. Andrew had a checkered past himself. He actually had done time in prison for robbing a bank and committing arson, and he was now out of prison, and he had really pulled his life together, and he sees Belle's ad in the paper, and he decides it's time for him to settle down, and he likes the sound of Belle's ad. So Andrew answers this ad, and over the course of 18 months, the two correspond only by letter. And the final letter that Belle is known to have sent Andrew was dated January 31st of 1908, and it read, "To the dearest friend in the world, no woman in the world is happier than I am. I know that you are now to come to me and be my own. I can tell from your letters that you are the man I want. It does not take one long to tell when to like a person, and you I like better than anyone in the world I know. Think how we will enjoy each other's company. You, the sweetest man in the whole world, will be all alone with each other. Can you conceive of anything nicer? I think of you constantly when I hear your name mentioned, and this is when one of the dear children speaks of you, or I hear myself humming it with the words of an old love song. It is beautiful music to my ears. My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Aw, that's so sweet, right? She also wrote, "My dear, do not say anything about coming here. Now sell all that you can get cash for, and if you have much left, you can easily bring it with you, as we will soon sell it here and get a good price for everything. Leave neither money or stock up there, but make yourself practically free from Dakota." And Andrew put his plan to marry Belle in action. He had completely fallen in love with her, and he wanted to follow Belle's instructions and liquidate everything, get all of his savings, sell off all of his stuff, not tell anyone, and head to LaPorte, Indiana to marry the love of his life. Andrew arrived on the Gunness farm sometime in late January of 1908, and pretty much as soon as he arrived, Belle insisted that the two go deposit the $3,000 cash that he had brought into a savings account. So that's what they did. And Andrew disappeared right after this. Now, Andrew had a brother named Osley who had become very worried after he hadn't spoken to his brother in a few months. And I'm 100% sure I'm saying that name wrong, but just go with it, okay? In an attempt to find his brother, he went to his brother's old home and started going through things, and ends up finding all the letters that Belle had sent to Andrew, telling him to sell everything and not tell anybody and just head on over to her farm so they could get married and live happily ever after. But Osley was very suspicious when he read these letters. He immediately suspected that something was going on. He was especially suspicious when he read that Belle didn't want Andrew to tell anyone about what he was doing. So Osley decides he's going to write Belle about his missing brother. And Belle does respond by telling him that Andrew up and left and went back to Norway, and said that he doesn't want anyone looking for him. But Osley was not buying this. He knew his brother, and he knew this did not sound like something that his brother would do. Now, around the same time that Andrew Helgelien disappeared, Ray Lamphere was fired by Belle Gunness. Ray had fallen in love with Belle. You know, their little on and off thing had just been a fling, like a fun thing for Belle, but Ray had legitimate feelings for Belle. He had started becoming very jealous and kind of acting up a little bit, starting fights with Belle, and she just didn't have time for all that, so she decided to just fire him. But Ray did not take this well, and he soon began essentially stalking Belle. So once the stalking began, Belle goes down to the courthouse and tries to get Ray committed. She tells them that he's insane, and she demands that they hold a sanity hearing. But they hold this hearing, and Ray passes and he's released. And a few days after the sanity hearing, Ray shows up on the Gunness farm and refuses to leave and starts making threats towards Belle, like physical threats, enough to scare her. So we're now in April of 1908, and Belle decides that after she's been threatened by Ray, that she needs to talk to her lawyer. So she goes down and speaks to her lawyer and tells him that she thinks that Ray is going to kill her and he's going to burn down her house, which is oddly specific, but maybe these were part of the threats that he had made when he had shown up on her farm that day. Then the very next day, after Belle had talked to her lawyer on April 28th, 1908, the Gunness farm burns down completely to the ground. The fire had started at around 4 o'clock in the morning. So once the fire finally went out, workers and authorities go out to the Gunness farm and start sifting through the ruins. And they know at this point that they're likely looking for bodies. The whole Gunness family is missing at this point. And while the workers were sifting through the debris of the fire, they end up finding 4 bodies in the basement, 3 children and 1 adult female. The adult female was missing her head. Something more sinister happened here on that farm before the fire broke out. All 4 of the bodies were together, all in the basement. The body that was supposedly Belle Gunness's body was missing its head, and no one could find the head. Suspicions were super high, so LaPorte County Sheriff Albert Smutzer decides to launch a formal investigation. They start questioning people that are close to Belle. Her lawyer was questioned, and he tells them that Belle had just been there the day before, talking about how she was afraid of Ray Lamphere. The lawyer told authorities that during the meeting, Belle said, quote, "I'm afraid he's going to kill me and burn the house." Of course, this is referring to Ray Lamphere. And once police heard that bit of information, they decided that they were gonna have to take Ray in for questioning. So they bring him in for questioning, and he immediately denies any kind of involvement with anything. However, the information that they had on Ray, all the circumstantial evidence that they had, seemed pretty compelling, so they go ahead and they charge him with 4 counts of murder and arson. And if what happens next would have never happened, then Belle Gunness's crimes likely would have never been uncovered, and she would have went down in history as just a victim. When Belle lured Andrew Helgeline to her farm and killed him, she wasn't counting on his brother caring so much and not giving up on him. He already had suspicions that Belle was involved in his brother's disappearance. So he decides that he's going to head to LaPorte, Indiana to do his own investigation and find out just what the hell's going on. So he arrives in Indiana and he goes and speaks with the sheriff, Albert Smutzer. He tells him all about his suspicions of Belle Gunness and what he thinks happened to his brother. He asks if it's okay if they go search the farm and potentially do a little digging. The sheriff agrees, and the men set out for Gunness Farm. And when they get there, a man named Joe Maxson is on the scene. He was hired to be the farmhand after Ray Lamphere had been fired. So that means that he was working for Belle when the fire happened. And Maxson had some very interesting things to tell the sheriff. He tells the men that before the fire, Belle had instructed him to level the yard. She told him to do this because there were several holes throughout the yard, and when he asked her what these holes were, she told him that it was just waste and stuff that had been put into these holes, and they had tried to bury it. But upon hearing what the men had to say about their suspicions, Maxson tells the men that they probably should start digging where those holes had been, and he instructs them exactly where each hole had been, and the men begin to dig. And on May 5th, 1908, Osley Helgeline finally finds the butchered body of his brother Andrew, buried 4 feet underground. And they quickly begin unearthing a lot of body parts that had been putrefied. They were, quote, a jumble of putrefied body parts, naked torsos wrapped in burlap, heads, arms, and legs scattered around. And amongst the bodies, they find Jenny Olson. She was actually the second body that they found. And it's thought that Belle probably killed Jenny when she started asking questions about some of the disappearances that had started happening. Eventually, at least 12 bodies were unearthed, and that's not including all of the different limbs and stuff that they found scattered all around the property. It's not totally clear how many victims were actually found on the farm since there were so many random limbs found. Family members of missing men would come to the farm to see if their loved ones were amongst Belle's victims. And during the excavation, the farm became kind of like a tourist attraction. They had thousands of people show up on site to watch authorities unearth these bodies. People were traveling to Gunness Farm from all over the country. Vendors were on site to sell merchandise and food to the crowds, and families would have picnics on the property while investigators were literally unearthing bodies. So Belle's method of murder varied. She would sometimes sneak into a sleeping man's room at night, chloroform them, then she'd drag them down to the basement, she'd dissect them, chop them up, then feed the remains to her hogs. And sometimes she would poison the men with strychnine, which is likely how she killed her 2 infants and her first husband. And sometimes she would split their heads open with blunt objects. She would then cover the remains in quicklime and bury them, or she would feed the chopped up remains of the dissected victims to her hogs. And suspicion was growing that Belle was actually not the woman that was found in the basement. Doctors thought this because the size of the body just didn't add up. Belle was considered a large woman. She was about 5'9" and she weighed over 200 pounds. The woman that they had found in the basement was very small and petite. She was said to be about 5'2" and weighed much less than Belle Gunness. And doctors said that they could confirm if it was Belle or not if they had the head, because they could see all the dental work. They would be able to confirm if it was her or not. The problem was they could not locate the head. And around this time, tons of people were reporting that they had seen Belle out and about, and they were claiming that she in fact was still alive. And if you look back at old newspaper articles when this case was happening, it was widely believed that Belle Gunness actually had not died in that fire, and that the woman that they found was just planted there to make it look like Belle had died. So police were fully ready to launch an investigation into this, but they did eventually find some dental bridge work that Belle's doctor claimed was Belle's. They found it in the rubble from the fire. So authorities just kind of considered it case closed after the dental bridge work was found. But the idea that Belle had actually escaped from justice was very widely accepted by most people. Ray's defense was that Belle Gunness was actually not dead and that she was responsible for the murders. So in the end, Ray Lamphere was only found guilty of arson, and he ended up escaping the murder charges. And he was sentenced to at least 2 years in prison for his role in the fire. But on December 30th, 1909, Ray Lamphere died of tuberculosis after serving about a year of his prison sentence. And before he died, he gave a deathbed confession, insisting that Belle was not dead and that he had helped her escape by taking her to Stillwell. Stillwell was a small town very close to LaPorte. He says that Belle caught a train to Chicago. He says that he returned to the farm to set the fire. This was supposed to help Belle escape. And then the plan was Ray was going to meet up with Belle, but when he went to meet her, she had already left. Ray claimed that the headless body that was found in the basement was actually that of a housekeeper that Belle had hired right before the fire. He said that Belle had killed the housekeeper and her own children, and that she planted the bodies in the house to make the deaths look like they were just an accident. Ray Lamphere also admitted to helping Belle dispose of her victims' bodies, the ones that she had lured from the personals ads, but he still denied helping Belle murder the victims. Just because the case had been closed by investigators, it didn't end all the suspicion around Belle Gunness still being alive. Reports of people seeing Belle Gunness out and about continued to pour in over the years. And police investigated most of these reports and were able to discount almost all of them, but there was one that they just couldn't figure out. In 1931 in Los Angeles, a woman going by the name of Esther Carlson was arrested for the death of a man that she had been caring for named August Lindstrom. It was suspected that Esther had killed August in order to get the money out of his bank account. He had about $2,000 in his account. And there were a lot of people that thought that she looked just like an older version of Belle Gunness. It became widely believed that this woman, Esther, was actually Belle Gunness, and her crimes definitely seem similar to that of Belle's. Esther Carlson ended up dying in prison before anyone could really pin down what her true identity was. And it's said that some people that had lived in LaPorte when Belle Gunness was alive and living there went to the morgue to view Esther Carlson's body, and they walked away from that morgue absolutely convinced that they had just seen the body of Belle Gunness. And despite years and years of investigating this case, there are still a ton of questions surrounding a lot of aspects of it. And we may never know the true extent of Belle Gunness's crimes, or Ray Lanfear's for that matter. I honestly don't know what I think. I'm usually not a conspiracy theorist at all, but just hearing the facts of this case and all the stuff that I read and the newspaper articles that I've read, I really think it could be likely that Belle did fake her own death. Who knows, maybe one day we'll finally find out what exactly happened. But that's it for today's case. Thank you so much for being here. And if you wouldn't mind liking this video and subscribing, I would really, really, really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.